Hello and welcome to the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria, meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. My name's Rod Peppiatt. Today our reflection has to do with the fact that we in worship will be sharing at the table of Holy Communion. I want to read to begin with though from the letter of Paul to the Ephesian church. Chapter 3. This is the reason that I, Paul, am a prisoner for Jesus Christ for the sake of you Gentiles. For surely you have already heard of the commission of God's grace that was given me for you, and how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I wrote above in a few words, a reading of which will enable you to perceive my understanding of the mystery of Christ. We remember, of course, that mostly these would be read out because most of the early Christians were illiterate. Paul goes on, in former generations this mystery was not made known to humankind as it has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. That is, the Gentiles have become fellow heirs, members of the same body and sharers in the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Of this gospel I have become a servant, according to the gift of God's grace that was given me by the working of his power. So that's from Paul. Our contemporary reading of grace comes from Jim Berklow in the United States, and it's called Staring at Bread. So much of the time we eat and drink mindlessly. We don't pay that much attention to how it tastes or feels. We don't spend much time savouring it, focusing our attention on the food itself, rather than on conversation or on other things that are on our minds. The communion ritual offers a chance to mindfully eat and drink. It is soul food and it is slow food. As you eat the sacramental bread, imagine the fields of wheat. Imagine the rows of vines and meditate for a moment on the labour of the people who worked to make grain into bread, grapes into wine. Imagine the millions of human beings who have taken the bread and wine with attention and intention over the past 2,000 years of Christianity. Imagine that vast community of faith being culminated in this very moment. Imagine that you have eaten bread and drunk wine, not just for yourself, but for all of those who have gone before and for all who will come after you. Excuse me. Some years ago, Catherine and I were fortunate enough to be in Dublin. Yes, it rained, and yes, it was beautiful. Quite by chance, one Sunday morning we attended worship at Christ Church Cathedral, which is more formally known as, quote, the Cathedral of the Holy Trinity, the Cathedral of the United Diocese of Dublin and Glendalough, and the Cathedral of the Ecclesiastical Province of the United Provinces of Dublin and Cashel in the Church of Ireland. That title is why it's more commonly known as Christ Church Cathedral. The building is just over 1,000 years old. It's magnificent and it is incredibly beautiful. Worship, and particularly the music, was heavenly. It soared our spirits. We went forward to receive the bread and wine of Holy Communion together, and we knelt at the rail. And as I did so, I became aware of the smooth stone on which I knelt, and it was like this, worn smooth by the knees of worshippers over those 1,000 years. And I looked down, the stone had worn away, and I was sure I could feel the knees which had eroded it. And I realised as Catherine and I knelt there in Dublin that our home church in Hobart was also sharing in Holy Communion that day. And that realisation created in me a profoundly and deeply emotional sense of the cloud of witnesses that stretches round the world and back in time, of something much bigger than those of us gathered on our knees at the rail. I became profoundly aware of the community of the holy life in which we live and move and have our being. And in that moment, I experienced the sacrament of Holy Communion maybe more deeply than I had ever done before, certainly that I could remember. That was the experience that came to mind as I read those words from Paul in his letter to the church in Ephesus, written 1,000 years before that cathedral was built in Dublin. The Gentiles have become fellow heirs, he said, members of the same body, sharers in the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. I wonder how Paul's listeners heard those words. I wonder if they sensed how radical it was for a Jewish leader of the time to be saying them. Sharers in the promise. This was no condescending or grudging statement. There was no sense of, oh, all right, you can join in. This was a full-blooded, conviction-driven statement of inclusion. Welcome at the table of sacred hospitality. Included in the way of sacrament. Welcome in the full life of the community. In our day and our context here, the really radical sense of our inclusion can sometimes be hard to grasp. Even though today not all churches practice an open table. And some of you might remember, as I do, sitting in church as a young person, watching the adults receive the bread and wine, knowing that I was somehow not considered ready yet. But still, in a church that says to all, you are welcome to receive, being sharers in the promise is perhaps not as startling as it once was. And I think that's why the comment from Jim Burklow in our contemporary reading grabs my attention. The communion ritual, he says, offers a chance to mindfully eat and drink. It is soul food and it is slow food. I've been reading and thinking a fair bit lately about mindfulness and about its invitation to pay attention to the moment. To pay attention as well to the community with whom we share in the promise. Staring at the bread invites us, says Burklow, to call to mind the people and the work that bring the bread and wine to us. And also, in his words, the millions of human beings who have taken the bread and wine with attention and intention in the past 2,000 plus years of Christianity. There's something in that, just like our Dublin experience, that speaks to me together deeply about what we do together at the table of Holy Communion. I had intended to stop there, but as I wrote this, I've been struck by a moment of sadness, and I need to deal with that. Not so that people can make me feel better afterwards, but to make a confession among people I love, my community. For some time, for some of our people who aren't with us on Sundays, it's been a long time since they have shared in communion over the bread and wine. And for this, I am sorry. I know it's not all down to me, And I'm going to ask for help from others in the congregation so that we might attend to this together. But in this moment, this realization sits heavily on me. And so I ask forgiveness and seek to do better. As I do, it hits me once more that this is not a table of perfection. That's part of the depth of Holy Communion as well. That there's room for us all to be mindful of our brokenness and of the divine grace that holds us in the midst of all of that. The table that says to us, "Come as you are." And actually, that's the best place to stop. Blessings.